And the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Hello and welcome to the only independent news and opinion program where we chronicle two distinct possibilities, either the demise and possible extinction of the Homo sapien or the greatest leap forward in all of human history. One thing is certain, there is no status quo. This is the Daily Australian Radio Show, episode number 54 for Thursday, March 20th, 2025. I am part A of your hosting team, Jason Olborn, and part B, but there is no B, there is only all A+. Her name is Nicola Charles. Welcome back to the show.
Do you know what? I don't want to brag, but I did used to get a lot of A+ at school.
Oh, don't you love it? Well, there you go. What an appropriate introduction for you there. The good old A+. Didn't it feel great when you put in an assignment when you're a young kid and you get back an A+?
Yeah, I'm going to read out some of my reports one day on this show or on the podcast. They were very funny, some of the things that the teachers used to say. So it's another early one for us today, listeners. We've been a bit slack this week. We've done a couple of hours later, but we're back to the early mornings. So it's Thursday. We're one step closer to the weekend.
We certainly are when we get up to do this new show, given that daylight saving is still on. I tell you what, it's pitch black. It feels like that it could still be yesterday, but I assure everyone it is Thursday at the time of this recording, and there's a lot of news to discuss and to dismantle as we are looking ahead and just wondering, it doesn't seem to be what it was a month ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. Like, things are changing, and the general public, well, goodness me, they are wanting answers and they don't want the status quo either.
No, it's like it's all this rush to judgment stuff, and it's almost like the media, I think it's deliberate, the establishment media, they've become bipolar and they call us conspiracy theorists. I mean, it's just hilarious, you know, they go with the story and then it's almost like they invent and create the narrative. And I'm a creative writer, so I'm all for that if you're writing a book. But this isn't fiction. This is real life, and they're making up these stories and they're jumping to conclusions, and it's whatever conclusions helps the government of the day politically. And then we find out in short order that everything they've reported was actually wrong, probably caused a lot of heartache, a lot of fear. We know they like creating fear, Jason. And then when the truth comes out, guess what? We're the ones left holding the baby, and we have to report, yeah, no, soz, they were wrong about that.
Well, exactly right. When the mainstream media decided that it was going to become the PR department for the government and opposition, or for Parliament House, if you will, that's when mainstream media lost all credibility. And it's only a case of credentialism, the belief that somebody who holds the credentials still holds the authority, is maintaining this power. And I'm always reminded when I watch that original 2007 documentary Zeitgeist by Peter Joseph, and in the very beginning up came a quote, and it said, truth is authority, authority is not truth. And I think that still holds.
Oh, wonderful.
And they are not intertwined. And that's the whole point of where Tucker Carlson goes when he absolutely breaks out into hysterical laughter when the word misinformation comes up.
Yeah.
It's just, there's no such thing. It's either truth or lies. And that is represented by that same quote, you know, authority is not the truth, truth is the authority.
Well, there's another word that's become heresy, isn't there? And it's debate. It's like we're not allowed to talk about anything anymore. And if there is something that they describe as a debate pre any election, you know, they control who's allowed to be in that debate. And it's always this two sides of one coin, and there are no other options. And it's just becoming really obvious. I'm starting to get a bit embarrassed for them. There was a news story that was sent to me overnight. I think it ran last night in the establishment media that we've got robots and 3D printers making houses in Melbourne now, which got my back up because my husband works in construction. And we've got this 3D printer on sort of like a a crane system that would, like a frame that's used at a pop concert, rock concert, for lighting. And this printer is basically splurging out like a cake making machine, all of this concrete, a solid concrete house. And the overseas builder who's come to Australia to try this new building product is saying, oh, there's too much of a supply chain in Australia just to build a wall. That's because, mate, there are buildings, beautiful, stunning, architecturally sublime buildings standing that were built 100 years ago in this country, and in England hundreds and hundreds of years ago, going back to the 1500s. So, you can build your big concrete houses all you want. I think it's ugly. I think when you get inside a concrete house, it feels like hermetically sealed. It's got a weird damp feeling in concrete houses. Like, if you've got the air conditioning on, it's like it doesn't breathe. I'm not sure it's good for people. There are people that say it blocks out EMFs, electromagnetic frequency. Well, I think that's gone out the window, that debate, because I'm not sure government would allow concrete houses if that was the case, because they want to be able to look in at you and see what you're doing. So it was horrible. It was horrible to watch. It's splurging out like icing out of it, when you squeeze the icing thing. And it's just like, really? That's where we're going? And it's everything, Jason, isn't it? Because, oh, this saves us money and this is cheaper. And so this is the way we're going to do it. All about putting people out of work, right?
Well, that's part of it too. But I tell you what's interesting is how things get short-circuited. Now, I got into the housing market somewhere, I think the year 2000, 2001, somewhere there. I bought my first property, and to get to that stage was, was a big deal. How are you going to accumulate a deposit and all that stuff? But I decided to purchase after thinking, I'd buy something sort of inner west in Sydney, and decided against a two-bedroom unit in Marrickville at the time, which was, affordable compared to what it would be today. But I decided to sort of move to the outer suburbs, to the outskirts where the new suburbs were going in. And I was quite, excited about it. And as a kid growing up in the northern suburbs of Sydney, we moved into a brand new home back then. So it was kind of, a rite of passage that as it was my turn to become
Yeah.
the father and etc. and the husband, that we would do the same thing. So anyway, got very much into it and looked at all the builders back in the day. And my first home I purchased off now defunct AV Jennings. I think it's morphed into something else, but that was, the very proud old builder. And it just felt kind of cool that that's where I would be doing this. But I do remember I then went and got involved with property education and became really sort of motivated by it, and decided that I'd try and buy another property and another property. At some stage, I think I had three or four. So the recipe and what I'd learnt had worked. Anyway, in that time, we went through the introduction of the first home buyers grant for the first time, which I missed out on, and we also learnt about the basics or basics, which was the rules of all the different things that you had to do to protect the home environmentally, to conserve energy. So you had to put bats in the ceilings, insulation in the
Yes.
walls, and all of these processes that was part of it. But the next stage was a thing called mixed materials. So in other words, every home has a floor plan, and at the front of it you have a different facade, something that that is fake, that gives it a certain appearance. So you could have identical homes up and down a street, but if they all had a different facade, technically they all look different.
What, like stone cladding?
Yes, exactly. So the idea was you couldn't just have a rendered face or a bagged and painted or face brick. It had to have a little bit of um, different types of lightweight material. You could use metal, you could use wood, you could use
What did you choose?
well, back in the day, I picked the first home I had was a Georgian style, so it was face brick with these bagged and painted coins on the
Oh, I
side. Which
like Georgian.
it was quite a stunning little three-bedroom cottage. The next one we went for something different. But my point was that you had to make a very specific big deal about what your facade was. And of course, some people would only want to spend, nothing or a couple of $1,000s, and some people would spend a fortune and put balconies and things like that. And you could spend back in the day 20,000. Today, I assume that would be three times the price. People might be spending 60 or $80,000 on a facade with a balcony, etc. So, each and of course that doesn't add anything to the home. That's just purely the aesthetics. So when you're talking about concrete homes and affordability, and if anyone's ever walked through, which I'm sure everyone has, walked through a factory or a warehouse at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning in winter. It's freezing cold and
Yeah.
it's just so uninhabitable. It's the last place that you want to be. And walking on a hard concrete floor, particularly if you're wearing, proper business attire, for example, and the shoes aren't exactly spongy, you feel like that, you could slide, slip. It's hard surface. There's
There's no
nothing.
give in the floor. When you talk about those facades, Jason, you make me. I'll tell you what I want. You know that movie, The Purge, and God, I swear to God, don't we all feel like we're in the Purge right now? I want a home that has those giant metal shutters where I can reinforce my home and close it down. And unless you drive a truck through the wall, you're not getting in. That's what this world has done to me. That would be my facade, a full metal jacket, let's say.
Oh, that's hilarious. So all of a sudden, you don't want a home, you just want the world's biggest panic room.
Yes, please.
And perhaps with a really deep basement that kind of freaks me out a little bit, that whole thing about America. They all have basements in their homes.
Oh, it's good. It's creepy, isn't it? So, see, if you have a concrete floor, there's no crawl space. And I kind of like that bounce in the floor when you know there is a little gap. But at the same time, in Australia, with crawl spaces and stuff, I just think, there are thousands of giant spiders literally beneath your feet, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, that's right. So your pest control guys, your best friend, and of course, if you have a timber frame, you've got to have termite protection. So there's a lot that you need to do to sort of maintain a home, and people will argue, therefore, that there are advantages to concrete, and sure, of course, they are cost effective, the speed of construction,
But
etc.
that's
So
it. That's it then,
But but you're right. So what happens once you move into this particular home and you realize that it's not particularly homely, then you're kind of stuck, aren't you? And it's like when you purchase a new vehicle and you realize that it's not suitable for whatever reason. I always find it interesting when I'm looking at car sales, which I inevitably do, a couple of times a week at least, just out of interest and because I'm always buying and selling cars. But when you see a car that someone's selling privately that's got less than a couple of thousand kilometers on it, and you wonder, did they make a mistake? Have they run
nudge
into
the clock.
yeah, or whatever? But I saw one yesterday. It was a 2024 or 2025 with 1,000 or 2,000 kilometers on it. It was one of the new.
What?
Yeah, one of the new Chinese brands, and they were selling it pretty much for what the dealers were selling it. And so you think they're okay, they bought the car, they're obviously not happy with it, but they're trying to get their money back and they've gone to trade it in. And the dealer said, well, you might have paid 35,000, but we can only pay you 25 for it in a trade in. So therefore they try their luck in that particular market. And that's just one of the worst feelings in the world when you've made that decision. But when you put it into a home, yes, you can sell, but then you've got to get back into the market and prices go up, and all of a sudden a simple error, stamp duty, agents' fees, and getting back into the market, you might be $100,000 upside down
Well,
just
it's
for
the same
picking the
with
wrong
some
home.
cars. If you're rich enough to buy one of those big Range Rover Vogue SEs, the big Range Rovers that the
Mm.
Royals drive, I think it's about 260K plus. And as soon as you drive it off the dealership lot, you've lost 100 grand. So you may as well buy a demonstrator with 3 or 4 thousand on the clock, if you can, or as you say, a recently used one. But the problem I have with these houses and concrete homes and stuff is, it's like the furniture that's being made now. When I can afford it, I buy antiques and I love it. I love the idea that it's lived before and it's old, and tell myself stories about who owned it before. But you've got all this furniture now that is between 100 and 200 years old, right? And of course it looks it, and hopefully it's been looked after. But it's the same with homes. There are homes that are being built now, just like there's furniture being built now that's not going to be here in 100 years' time. No offense, but some of these big furniture stores in Australia, I won't name them, but they're usually the ones with half a page front page ad on Melbourne's newspaper. Their furniture isn't going to be here in 100 years' time to be an antique, right? Because they just don't make things like that anymore. So when it comes to homes, I always think when it's weird, we've got this world where when there's a tried and tested method like a brick home with a timber frame that is provably very good for longevity, it's like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why are you changing it? They're doing steel frames on homes, and you can see them because they're always blue, and they're doing all this concrete, and I think it's ugly. Yes, it's cheap, but I just think what's that going to look like in 100 years? Probably not very good, Jason.
Well, when you think, if you want to think of big concrete buildings, Darling Harbour in Sydney was redeveloped in around 1988, and it was magic because it was an old sort of, rail yard. And Laurie Brereton, and then the New South Wales State Minister, led the charge to redevelop it, and Darling Harbour came alive, and it became an amazing tourist attraction. But fast forward 30 years, and that convention centre was knocked down and
Yep.
replaced. 30
Maybe that's
years.
the thing, right? Because don't they build, well, actually, I know they do. I know they build cars, certain prestige brands, let's say, I won't name them. But also, I think now it's happening with buildings to expire. There's a word for it. I need to write this word on my wall in my office so I can remember it. There's a specific word for it where they're now building products to expire. For instance, in the 90s, and by the way, I've been very drunk on that Darling Harbour on a number of occasions in the 90s. Had a lot of fun down there. But for instance, in the 90s, for I think it was Mother's Day one year, I was modeling. I bought my mum a new dishwasher. I don't think she'd ever had a dishwasher. 22 years later, her dishwasher broke, and she said, wow, that dishwasher you bought me lasted 22 years. Then she bought herself a new one, and it lasted 2 years and then broke. And my husband's parents, just this week actually, their fridge broke, and it was from like 1982. And
Wow.
so things used to be built to last, and they're actually practically building things now not to last. Why? Because if you build things to last, you've lost a customer. That's how they view it. I was literally trained on this subject, and I find that very disappointing. So yeah, when you buy something new and it still feels like crap, and I've done it recently with a vacuum cleaner and it's already broken, it's deliberate. It's deliberately designed to not have longevity, unfortunately.
Well, and don't get me started on garden tools, on
Yes. Yeah, my
lawnmowers and
husband's
whippersnippers.
found that as well.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I'd like somebody to invent a garden tool that can't be broken, or at least can resist my inability to do the edges.
We have a 1950s. It looks like something out of an old horror film. We bought a completely rebuilt 1950s lawnmower that is self-propelled, not a ride along, a proper one, but you don't have to push it. It's got these things on the wheels, and you just flick the bar over, and it self-propels, and it's this big old thing, and it's heavy, and it looks and sounds like a lawnmower. And that's because all the new lawnmowers we kept having kept breaking. You got to, it's like me buying my antique furniture. Sometimes it's better to buy old stuff, and I definitely think it's better to listen to old people on the radio, Jason.
Well, that goes without saying. I'm going to make this point my first lawnmower I inherited off my late grandmother, and it had a sticker on it. It was a Victor, and it was made, I think, in 1992. I kept that lawnmower to 2005, and in the what are we 20 years since, I've gone through at least five
Yeah.
new lawnmowers
Yeah.
by comparison, and all different brands, and some of them are petrol, and some of them are battery, and whatever. But it's
So
very
this
hard to go
rush to
past.
judgment, this rush to judgment to buy new things, honestly, if you're spending lots of money on new things, and let's face it, a home is your biggest ever purchase, have a really good think about it. Think about what's still here, what was built a long, long time ago. Jason, should we get onto those news headlines before we waffle on?
Well, it is Waffle Thursday, so let's get on with the waffling news, if you will. And there's plenty to get through today. So, Australia's top spy wrote to the CIA asking to keep secret details of an investigation into phone calls made to the US Embassy in Canberra about an assassination plot before President John F. Kennedy was killed. Newly declassified files have revealed the once top secret cables between the head of ASIO, Sir Charles Spry, and CIA Director Richard Helms were among more than 80,000 pages of material released by President Donald Trump on Tuesday out of the US. A year before JFK's assassination, the US Embassy in Canberra got a call. Iron Curtain countries put a $100,000 bounty on Kennedy's head the
Ooh.
day after he was killed. Another call came, this time blaming the Soviets. They shed more light on discussions between Australia's top spy agency and the CIA about declassification of the investigation into the phone calls. The CIA brushed off these calls as crank messages, but if they were meaningless, why did ASIO beg the CIA to keep them classified? 5 years later, ASIO's chief, Charles Spry, wrote to the CIA asking them to do not declassify this file. Meanwhile, CIA Director Richard Helms agreed, saying there was every reason to keep it secret. The file, the Warren Commission document CD 971, was finally declassified in 1976, but portions were blacked out. So what was ASIO and CIA so desperate to hide? Meanwhile, John Garrett Underhill Jr., a man who knew too much, the day after JFK was shot, he fled Washington in a panic. He told friends a small clique within the CIA killed Kennedy. I may have to leave the country. 6 months later, he's dead. Underhill, though, was no random guy. He was an intelligence insider with Pentagon ties. And here's where it gets really interesting. He was linked to Intermarco, a CIA-backed arms dealer. Interarmco, I should say, was tied to the very store where Lee Harvey Oswald apparently bought his rifle. So the CIA's favourite arms dealer had a direct link to the rifle that the lone gunman, apparently lone, Oswald, allegedly used to kill JFK. This wasn't an assassination. This was an inside job. Customers at one of Australia's big four banks will be the first to get access to a kill switch, allowing them to instantly lock down their accounts. ANZ will roll out the digital padlock technology from mid-year to customers using their ANZ app, ANZ Plus, and internet banking services. Once activated, it will block debit and credit cards, as well as disable digital access and stop unauthorised activity on their accounts, but still allowing direct debits and loan repayments to go through. The tool will also notify the ANZ fraud monitoring system Falcon of any suspicious activity. Cyber criminals are constantly finding new ways to target Australians. The more tools customers have at their fingertips to protect their money, the better, ANZ Group Executive Australia Retail Marley Carnegie said. Now, free access to mental health counselling will be offered online and over the phone under Medicare from January next year in a groundbreaking new program to help Australians access support where and when they need it. Amid a national shortage of psychologists and psychiatrists, one of the biggest issues both sides of politics are trying to address is ensuring that when people put their hand up for help, they know where to go and who to ask. News.com.au can reveal that a new national early intervention service providing free digital mental health support will now go out to tender within weeks, with big providers and private health insurers in the running to operate it. Counselling will be free and accessible without a diagnosis or referral from a GP, and could help up to 150,000 people, offering free cognitive behavioural therapy delivered by skilled and trained professionals via phone or video. Prescription medicines will be capped at $25 per script under a major cost of living election promise set to be unveiled by Anthony Albanese on Thursday. The announcement will apply to medications listed on the PBS scheme and bring down the maximum costs of scripts, currently $31.60, by 20%. It's estimated 4 of the 5 scripts will benefit from the new cap, with patients estimated to save $786 million over 4 years. Common medications included estradiol, used by women undergoing menopause, diabetes medication like Jardiance, and Ritalin, which is used to treat ADHD. Medications for concession card holders and pensioners will remain currently subsidised at the rate of $7.70 until 2030. Meanwhile, in its headline story today, the same Australian newspaper reports of a measles outbreak in the US that is so bad, 300 cases total, that the White House has had to be tested. It also reported in its alarmist article that a survival rate is 997 out of 1,000. It also explained that a 6-year-old died from measles, so therefore it must be bad. However, Doctors Pierre Corey and Ben Edwards have reviewed patient records and determined that the measles patient who died in Texas of improperly treated mycoplasma pneumonia. Even after the positive mycoplasma test result, macrolide antibiotic administration was delayed for 10 hours. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Professor Didier Raoul in Marseille successfully treated hundreds of patients with a combination of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. All doctors, and especially all ER doctors, should be keenly aware of the danger of secondary bacterial infections on the heel of a viral infection such as COVID or measles, and be prepared to act quickly with the appropriate antibiotic. Several programs supporting young people at risk of reoffending will be cut unless the Victorian government increases funding. As it can be revealed, the state awarded only one new crime prevention grant in the past financial year. It comes as Labor's controversial tough bail laws edge closer to passing Parliament on Thursday amid ongoing debate over what some have labelled a youth crime crisis in the state. And Australians have lost their hope of a fair go, with profound implications for the election in an article appearing in The Guardian assessing the mood of the electorate ahead of the federal election. Taiwanese troops will simulate possible scenarios for a Chinese invasion in 2027 during the island's annual war games, the Defence Ministry said Wednesday, as Beijing maintains military pressure on Taipei. Let's get that right in a minute. Taiwan has never been ruled by Communist China, but Beijing insists the self-ruled island of 23 million is part of its territory and has threatened to seize the island by force. Officials in the US, Taipei's main backer and biggest arms supplier, have previously cited 2027 as a possible timeline for a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Now, President Trump says he has completed a very good telephone call with President Zelensky. We are much on track to align both Russia and Ukraine in terms of their requests and needs towards peace. And activists from Last Generation vandalised the Tesla store in Montreal today. On their Facebook page, the group stated, "We demand that Canada take a stand against Tesla billionaire CEO Elon Musk, who destroys democracies and spreads climate denial." Tesla has been removed from the Vancouver Auto Show just before the event's opening, organisers announced Tuesday. The decision comes as CEO Elon Musk faces growing criticism from the Canadians over his ties to President Trump and the ongoing trade dispute between Canada and the US. The Vancouver International Auto Show has removed Tesla as a participant in the event after the automaker was provided multiple opportunities to voluntarily withdraw, said Eric Nicol, the show's executive director, in a statement according to CTV News. Following Tesla's removal, all references to the company were taken down from the event's website. Jimmy Kimmel, on his show, made a joke that said or went like this: "People vandalising Tesla vehicles, new Tesla vehicles, please don't vandalise. Don't ever vandalise Tesla vehicles," and stared into the camera before getting laughter from the audience. Meanwhile, Scott Jennings on CNN has blasted leftist attacks on Elon Musk and Tesla and described it as terrorism. Meanwhile, Elon Musk's ex-valuation soars back to $44 billion, according to the Financial Times, and the Trump administration has cut $175 million in federal funding to the University of Pennsylvania for allowing men to compete in women's sports. Nicola.
Yeah, I've said before, I think it was something of a coup that Elon Musk. Now, a lot of people say that he is a rhino, that he's actually far left and that he's pretending to be a conservative. I don't know. He seems to be freedom of speech. I mean, he seems to be, I reserve judgment. But I always think, it's incredible because I've done a bit of work in this space that someone like Elon Musk managed to get everyone on the left, and I always cite sort of Hollywood and California, to buy these EVs because it's good for the planet, and the left say that they love everything that's good for the planet. And now the left are vandalizing EVs, I guess just specifically those. And yes, it is terrorism. They do like violence on the left, that I've noticed. Think about the Black Lives Matter riots and Antifa and then if anyone else, if anyone else protests or does anything, it's an insurrection. But it's extraordinary. I've reached the point, Jason, where I'm starting to think maybe Trump should announce that he's pro net zero, that he loves wind turbines and solar panels, and then let's see how the left reacts, because this may be the way to bring down net zero. It's just crazy to me. I mean, they've been telling us for the longest time we all have to get into these EVs, and now they're vandalizing them. So I have no explanation for it. It's like they almost always need an enemy. They always need something or someone to be violent towards. And the left also did this weird thing where, mentally you always categorize them as anti-war, leftist, greeny, anti-war hippies. And yet everyone in these parties that are on the left are suddenly warmongers and they're pro-war. So the left isn't really the left anymore. It's just so bizarre, isn't it?
You've nailed it, because this is the hypocrisy. Two arguments on any debate. They can be pro-EV but anti Elon Musk. but when they were pro Elon Musk. So what changed besides the fact that Elon Musk becomes, politically connected and is doing the work that every government must do, which is to eradicate, waste and corruption. But what we're seeing now in the left is that, they're not progressive. It's reactionary. It's the opposite. The conservatives have become the progressives with the planning and the control and
And they're
the
not
opposite.
violent. Us conservatives are not violent.
And that's the point. And people go, "Oh, what about January 6th?" Well, we know that January 6th was there's a whole backstory behind it. I just put the word out there, Ray Epps, for those that understand what's going on, and they'll all nod and agree that this was something that was set up. We know that there were FBI agents on the ground. We know that people were encouraged to go in, and we can go into that further and further. And I can probably reach out again to Chief Stephen Sund of the who was the Capitol Chief Police on the day of January 6th for a further interview. I've done a couple with him in the past, but it'd be interesting to see what his perspective is now that more evidence is coming out. But with the left, you can't look at them in any other way but radical,
Yeah.
entitled, professional victims.
Yeah, they do like to be professional victims. I find that a bit. I think this is one of the reasons why I could never be on the left because, we've constantly got news about, international threats and, I'm always suspicious about that as well, with regard to China or Russia and, it never happens. And then we put all this money into the war machine. But to want to be fighting internally in countries in America, I mean, it's got to stop. Like, calm down, get a job, go and live your life and stop trying to create violent situations. Now, I just want to also talk about this situation with ASIO and the CIA. And it was mentioning about not sharing documents. And when documents came out in the 1970s, they were redacted. And my brain pinged about Pfizer and all of the redacted documents. I actually think it should be defined legally as treason for any government department, and even a private company doing business in a country to redact documents. Because redaction is a cover up. Obviously, it's literally a cover up. You're covering it up with a big Sharpie pen, right? It means secrets, and we shouldn't have any secrets. We're supposed to have transparency in government. And I think that's why these documents have been released. And I just don't understand why we can't pass a law, a legislation, an act to prevent all this redacting of documents, because we need to feel confident in the powers that be, that they are representing us and not either their own interests or the interests of corporations. And we're not getting any of that. We've got the surveillance state that's gone up in Australia. And I always say, it's at every traffic light junction, even in the countryside where I am. And I always ask, where's the command center? Who's getting all of this footage, all of this information? We've already had a story in Australia that someone was censured in one of these command centers. We don't know where they are. We'll never know where they are. It could be international. I mean, we've got our elections being scrutinized by a private company in Singapore. That's very concerning. Foreign interference in an election, that's still against the law. But, who's getting this footage of Australians driving around? You can see people's faces in these new cars because of the way the window screen is shaped. We're really being kept in the dark. We are like a mushroom. We're kept in the dark and grown in shit, and they want to grow us in more shit with crap food. And I just don't like it. It's what it's done is it's made us edge, not even subtly, but quite dramatically away from democracy and into dictatorships, because in a dictatorship, you would never know what's going on. And that's where we are, Jason. So why are companies and governments allowed to redact any documentation? There shouldn't be anything in there that the public can't know about, right?
Well, exactly right. And the two words that they use that covers for everything is national security, which
No.
which is kind of ironic when they're all globalists and they don't care about your borders. So what do they
Yeah.
care about national security for? Like, this is yet another one of these, let's have two sides to every story so we can always be right. But you're dead right. Like, who do you serve in these situations? But having said that, just parking that for a moment, when you realise what's going behind the scenes, that there was clearly a conspiracy across a number of different areas to take out the president of the United States,
Mm.
and at the time if the CIA, which clearly it appears in what we've seen so far and we've suspected for decades, was involved in the taking out of their own president, that is an act of treason. That is a coup d'état. You don't get more treasonous than that. And that would mean that at that point, when Kennedy was taken out and replaced with Lyndon Johnson, that the spy agency at that point had taken over the running of the United States and pretty much has ever since, because they've
Mm,
never been held to account. And
yes.
this is what Trump is all about. So this is a good point. I think I'll introduce you now to one of the people I like reading on Substack and on X is Clandestine, obviously a pseudonym, and he wrote on the JFK files. He said, if you want to actually understand what's in the JFK files, you're going to have to read them and you're going to have to draw some conclusions for yourself. There's not going to be an official CIA document that says we killed JFK. There is just a mountainous accumulation of evidence that the CIA were engaged in unfathomable criminality, to include regime change, biological warfare, political warfare, psychological warfare, global control of media, assassinations, black market activities, gun and drug running and trafficking, etc. And then he says, the reason Trump wanted to drop these JFK files is because of the parallels to what is happening now. Trump is trying to educate the masses on how the game is played so that they can better understand what is happening in today's world. The JFK files are a detailed outline of the deep state playbook. It shows how the deep state operate, and this playbook is utilised to this day. This will be necessary knowledge for the public to have when it comes time to reveal who tried to assassinate Trump, who created COVID, who opened the southern border, who weaponized the media, who conducted regime change in Ukraine. It's the exact same playbook. The rollout is coordinated. They started with JFK for a reason. There is method to this madness. Them's fighting words, aren't they?
Yeah. And that phrase regime change, America is all over that, not just for itself, but getting involved in other countries. I mean, when Biden was vice president and he was getting, I believe, the attorney general fired in Ukraine and
Mm.
saying, I'll hold back your $1 billion in aid unless you do it, which is surely corruption and bribery. And he did it on stage on camera because it really does show that because JFK was pro citizen, pro American, they had to get rid of him because America as a machine is pro itself, right? And very much like our country now, I feel this in Australia is that these corporate governments, and that's what this is about. It's clearly all about money, right? And JFK wanted America to be better for Americans, and the CIA were on a different journey, right? These giant corporations masquerading as democratic governments are enriching themselves by feeding on their own civilians. And for my money, that's a war crime. And so anyone that comes along that is pro-citizen like JFK, now you may like Trump, you may hate Trump, but you are right. Look, Trump has, because of national security, he has certain systems and methods that he has to adhere to because very much like these files, he can't step forward, as Clandestine has said, and say the CIA killed JFK, the CIA were behind COVID, the CIA were behind my assassination attempt, which was a bit weak. It was probably just like a threat, remember who you work for. Very gangster. This is very Sopranos from the CIA. And he can't do that. He can't come out and say it. So what he's trying to do, and he knows, he seems to have faith. He's not sort of dumbing it down for us. He seems to have faith that if he provides enough evidence, we're the ones who can come out and say this, particularly in the independent media and obviously, smart minds online, that we can say, oh my God, this is what's happened. And he's probably sitting there going, yes, yes, you're getting it. Keep going, right? He's giving a detective, us, the amateur detectives, the information to draw the conclusion to the knowledge he wants us to have, but he may not speak, right?
Mm. You know, yeah, look, there is again so much that you can draw from what we've seen.
I
So
mean, what we want in Australia, right, is Anthony Albanese to come out on stage having had, a massive, come to Jesus moment and say to Australians in a live press conference, it's not me, the CIA are making me do it and they've threatened my family and, don't do anything they say, right? Don't do anything they say. Like that famous British comedian who died suspiciously of a giant heart attack, age 50. And he did that film One by One about how they were going to depopulate the planet. And one of the clips that goes viral about him is he looks at the camera and he says, I can't tell you much, but all I will say is throw away your televisions.
yeah,
We want them to come out with this extraordinary moment and say, run, right? You're in danger. But they
yeah,
don't. They keep playing the game. They keep
yeah.
leading us down the wrong path with lies. And it's not going to happen, but it can happen the way Trump is doing it.
Well, this is it. There is an approach. Now, again, it gets cloudy, and this is kind of where I was trying to form a thought there was that so we've seen now the Australian evidence links to a Soviet plot. Now, there's a whole lot of, everyone has their own bias. So the other plot that's in there is the James Angleton plot that connects to Israeli intelligence. So now what we have is a scenario with 80,000 pages of documents, still technically incomplete, and certainly the research in that space. And so people are going to point to what they want the outcome to be. So some want to be able to point the finger at Israel, some want to be able to point the finger at the Soviets, some want to be able to point the finger at the CIA. And realistically, what it does implicate is all of the intelligence agencies are as bad as each other. So if the CIA is up to this, and clearly the Soviets were, because we heard a bounty of $100,000 that would come from the KGB. And similarly, we know that JFK was arguing with the Prime Minister of Israel about nuclear weapons and not to develop them at the time. And so that this is considered to be another motivation why Israel wanted to take out Kennedy. So that's where we're at with all of it. So you're dead right when you say we just want the Prime Minister of the country to come out and say that the intelligence agencies are bad. The problem is that they'll never say it because they're beholden to them. And could you imagine what it would be like if you were elected into office and then you get elected into high office and then you're shown into a room, one of these skiffs or one of these particular rooms that you can't bring a phone in and it's secret information, and then somebody behind there happens to show you something or present a threat or a veiled threat. And then you think, what the hell am I going to do now? I'm literally taken. But because you've made it to this high office, you now know,
Yeah.
well, what I've got to do is I've got to play both sides of the fence, and I've got to be able to navigate this. Now, what's interesting is that the only man that we know that got there in this particular situation from outside the system was Trump. Now, some people are trying to say, well, hang on, he's part of the system. Some argue he's a Freemason. Some argue that he's involved with Epstein and all this stuff. And you can dismantle it. And I've argued it, the toss on this many times. Freemasons protect their own, so they certainly didn't protect Trump. So we can throw that one away. Epstein, he was friendly with Epstein. We know that he kicked out Epstein from Mar-a-Lago. But the other interesting thing about that is that people don't know that Trump was actually an FBI informant back in the 80s, where they used his Atlantic City, New Jersey casinos to be able to help take out the New York crime families that Rudy Giuliani was involved with. He was the one that brought down the five crime families in New York. Now, the other thing was, if that's the case, and people want to say that he was related and connected to Epstein, I'm now wondering, and no one's talked about this, that those beauty pageants that Trump was involved with, I'm wondering if that was a setup for some form of sting operation, kind of like an intelligence gathering operation there to see who would be attracted to want to come to Trump and want to infiltrate that particular industry as well. And that's just an aside, something that needs to be
A
explored.
honey trap. They certainly were gorgeous. I mean, I think what the release of these documents by Trump, because let's face it, no one else has done it for a very
Hmm.
long time. And this was a very long time ago, shows that he may be pro-Jewish, but he's not a Zionist. And we know that Biden was a Zionist. He was an announced Zionist, and Zionism is very different to just being a regular Jewish person. So that's interesting. But look, they all play these intelligence games. I can't remember which country it was, but apparently I saw a documentary on it a couple of years ago. During Trump's first term, there was a Middle Eastern leader, and Trump was actually in the room. And the leader was making all kinds of threats and all kinds of, language that was, not very favorable by Trump. And this was confirmed. I watched this on Fox News years ago before I stopped watching television. And apparently, Trump was listening and listening for a very long time, and he had a big manila yellow envelope in front of him. And while this guy was sitting there making threats, he was listening. And then when the guy stopped speaking, Trump didn't say anything. And he pushed the manila envelope across the table. And when the guy opened it, it was an aerial drone shot of his house and his backyard. And apparently, this Middle Eastern leader just said, okay, which is America saying, I know where all the people you love are, back off. Now, that wasn't Trump assassinating anyone or doing anything in that regard, but that was him flexing America's muscle to say, you can say all the shit you want. Don't even think about it. And apparently that was it. Nothing else was required. And he didn't say a word in the meeting. And the guy said, okay. So all of this kind of stuff goes on. But what we've got here with these JFK files is that it is likely that this department, the CIA, did cross that Rubicon and actually enacted their plot. Now, you might think, oh, well, we can't confirm it. Well, they enacted the COVID plot, right? We're 5 years later. No one has a flu emergency for 5 years. They've demolished us economically. So don't think they don't go through with plots, right? And if you don't believe in the moon landing anymore, and I don't, that's another one, right? If you don't believe in the story we've been told about 9/11, that's another one. So the CIA have to be reined in. And obviously, whoever's funding the CIA, because I think we've reached a point now, Jason, where there is potential, right, for the CIA to either be working for communist China or Russia, right? And the fact that Hillary Clinton keeps saying Russia, 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 and never mentions China, she never mentions China, that woman, makes me think, and we know Biden received money from China, that the Chinese Communist Party have their claws around the necks of the CIA. Now, you can imagine how dangerous that is from within. And we're all feeling the fallout of it. And you might sit there and go, well, why do you think it's China? Well, the Wuhan lab, right? Fauci, another compromised person, and Obama, working within China. Now, I'm not saying it was China, but we've got Chinese warships floating down the side of Australia. You just said that because of concerns about Taipei, Thailand are preparing for a possible Chinese invasion in 2027. I think they know things, obviously, that we don't know. This is what's behind redacted documents. But if the CIA, in basic terms, are doing the bidding of a foreign power, that could be why we're suffering through what we've been through, Jason.
Again, you just wonder, I mean, what is the motivation for any of this? And why is it?
Money.
Well, it's got to be more than money, though, doesn't it? How much money do you need? I find it interesting when I look at X yesterday, someone, as usual, having a go at Trump, and next to their name they have a US flag and a Ukraine flag. And you go, well, clearly you're compromised yourself, because you're not really pro-US, pro-Ukraine. You're pro-US establishment, deep state, pro-Ukraine. Because when it turns out that the narrative is going to shift on Ukraine, then you're going to realize that you've been betrayed. So are you still going to hate on Trump? Because it's always good to, it's interesting that the party of protecting the weak likes to pick on Trump because they perceive him as weak, because he's isolated and he's the outlier and he's not part of an establishment that a massive establishment of millions of people following. So they will pick on the weak even though they want to protect the weak. And so once again, I'm exposing their hypocrisy. Again, going back to Trump, there was that interesting thing with that meeting with Putin all those years ago and the handing over of the soccer ball. Remember that incident where you just handed him a soccer
No,
ball
I
and
remember Hillary Clinton dealing with Russia, though, after saying Russia, 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 and she hit a reset switch. Do you remember that big switch? What was that about? She's so dodgy, the things she's done, my God.
well, yeah, I mean, Hillary's as bad as you can get, and Dan Bongino is probably wins the quote of the month on that one. And Dan Bongino has just arrived at the FBI to take over as deputy director, and he said he announced today, I think that today's a bad day to be a criminal in the United States. So Dan Bongino is on the front foot, which is exciting. That's a big deal.
But
On
no, I'm worried about these people. I'm worried about Bongino. I'm worried about Trump. I'm worried about Elon Musk. I'm worried about Kash Patel. I'm worried about them all, right? Because they are digging into things that are established since the JFK assassination and
Mhm.
possibly foreign. It's very dangerous in America right now.
It certainly is. Well, this goes to the next level because of all of the arguments surrounding these so-called activist judges. And Trump made a comment, and Chief Justice John Roberts came out and said, "Well, you can't ask for an impeachment of a judge just because you don't like the judgment." But it's a lot more than that. And the White House has doubled down. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt's doubled down on that. Elon Musk has doubled down. Elon Musk has said something here. He said, "For more than 2 centuries, there's never been such an extreme abuse of the legal system by activists pretending to be judges. Impeach them." So my point there is that what seems to be happening, if you're following on the whole military tribunal Q thing once again, is that it was predicted that this would be the only way, that it would end up in military. So if if it's going to end up with a military tribunal that's going to take over civilian judges for whatever reason, somewhere down the track, then you must realise that the military is actively involved in the protection of these people, these civilians that are running the government. So I think that there is a war within a war, and it's literally a civil war within the US itself.
Yeah, and
You-
we're collateral damage. I've said this before on my podcast. There is two Americas right now, and
Mm.
there's a civil war going on that we can't see, that I think Trump is trying to protect people from. And everything we felt in our other countries, the Five Eyes nations, and pretty much the entire Western world, is collateral damage from what's going on in America. And they need to sort it out. They need to get to the root cause about why the CIA is working against American people.
Well, yes, and the my theory in life is you always use your weakness as your strength. And whilst we are the little people, we are also the most people. And it will be people power is about the only thing that defeats all corruption on earth. If 8 billion people stood up simultaneously and said, "No more authority, you're all gone," and we literally go in there and pull them out and say, "Well, that's it, you're going to be locked up and tried," and whatever else is going on, the people win, because that's what democracy is meant to be. It's people power. So I find that interesting in itself. The fact that Trump theoretically has gone down this covert civil war between the political establishment in the United States by winning office not once, not twice, but 3 times, if you will, but 2 times officially, is to protect the people from the damage of what a civil war might entail, such as the First American Revolution. And I've maintained since 2017 that we're literally living through the Second American Revolution. Now, why would a man be so intent on peace and saving his civilians over any other so-called establishment person that these people who follow along blindly like puppy dogs are more happy to the old system of civil war and death, war and death. And here's Trump saying, "Well, let's try and preserve, not start wars. Let's end wars. Let's not have a civil war." And I wonder, when you made that comment about Trump and Zionism, now people will say, "Well, hang on a second, he's for the state of Israel, so that technically makes him a Zionist," which is to be pro the land of Israel. I look at it another way and I go, I think that this is more ancient. I think this is more, in a way, he's not, I wouldn't say forcing prophecy, but I think he's giving prophecy every single chance of coming true. So, in other words, if Israel is fighting a war against terrorism in such a way that people hate them for being too heavy-handed, for
They
want
do.
of a,
That's why. Yeah.
for a simple term, against an organisation run by a terrorist organisation that hasn't had an election in 20 years, pretending to be legitimate, that's not, that still hasn't returned the terrorists, and the terrorists, sorry, I should say the hostages. The terrorists haven't returned the hostages. These hostages may well be dead, and they don't say anything. Now, what is the price? Is it an eye for an eye, a life for a life? Is it what's the value of this? This can never be measured. It can never be accurate unless it's going to be one for one. It should be none for none. So, what is Israel going to do if it wins this so-called war and gets to the other side? Is it going to push ahead and then say, well, now what we're going to do is we're going to go for setting up Israel to then bring the Jewish Messiah, which is to bring peace on earth. And the only way that can actually take hold is for the building of the third temple that just so happens to be on land that is in East Jerusalem, that is where the Dome of the Rock, the third holiest Muslim site is in the world. They have to take that back. So if they do that, it's going to get a whole lot worse before it's so-called going to get better. But then you've got Christians that say that the Jewish Messiah is actually the Antichrist. So where do you go next? So let's say all of that plays out, and the third temple, which by the way, the materials of which have already been paid for and purchased. So this is something that is active. Now you might get some of the extreme Israeli ministers who will talk about the third temple, but they won't come out in public and announce it as a policy. But they have discussed it at least in the last couple of years. So if that were to be the case, is Donald Trump actively letting all these chess moves walk out, and so that the only way that the Antichrist can be exposed, if this is what it really was to be, would be the second coming of Christ? So you're literally saying, Jesus, come back and save us. I think it's extraordinary that this whole subplot is literally playing out in the background, and then you'll have religious scholars saying, well, you can't force prophecy. But you can't just sit around and just expect that some man in a cloth is going to appear out of the sand and convince you that he's Jesus Christ coming back. And of course, he can't look like him, he can't sound like him, can't do anything, because that would be too obvious. It would be fake. So why is it that a portion of the world, a significant proportion, possibly the majority of the world, believes in religious figures, believes in God, believes in Jesus Christ? A smaller minority of people who are Jewish people don't believe in Jesus Christ being a Jewish person that was the Messiah, but the Messiah is coming. So technically the Christians and the Jewish people believe that their Messiah is coming in possibly the near future. That just blows my mind.
Well, I'm trying to interview an American pastor, and he was originally, his name's Cohen, but he's Christian now, and he actually believes that the Antichrist is King Charles III, and he does many documentaries on it, and he takes all of his information from Scripture. And I'm actually trying to interview him on my podcast. He's so busy; he's a very hard guy to get hold of. But I also, just because we're getting towards the end of the show, I just wanted to also touch very briefly on two things: the measles thing, which we'll get to in a second, but also this kill switch on the ANZ Money app, which I think proves that the digital world is very unsafe. Now, I've got my own experience here this week. So I got married at the end of last year, not too much to the end, September. And we're now in our third round of trying to get a marriage certificate in Victoria that doesn't have a typo. And I was required to use my marriage certificate as an ID last week as to why my name had changed. You know, it's the same for all women. We have to go through this thing where we have to ID why, you know, passport's in one name, haven't changed that yet. Vic Roads driver's license is in another name. The weird thing is, I used my marriage certificate, not realizing there was massive mistakes in it, to get my Vic Roads driver license, and they put it through.
Wow.
But then I had to use my marriage certificate for something else last week, and they said, oh, but there's date typos. So they got my husband's first name wrong, they got his birthday wrong, and they got my birth year wrong. So now, because of my birth year, we're in the third time of trying to get this rectified. Like, what kind of absolute moronic idiots have you got working at births, deaths, and marriages? Now, this office of births, deaths, and marriages closed in 2020 because of COVID and hasn't bothered reopening. So you can't go in there and get it sorted out quickly. But here's the interesting thing that was said on the phone to my husband when he was trying to sort this out. He said, could you just send us a digital version of this marriage certificate in lieu of the certificate coming in the post? And they said from births, deaths, and marriages, we cannot do that because it is unsafe and the marriage certificate could be hacked and therefore we will never send it digitally. Now, I find that interesting. I don't know if they're privatized or a government department at this stage, probably privatized, that they would say that if that is an alert to digital ID, nothing is, right? Because they want everything on your digital ID, which would include something like a marriage certificate. So the birth deaths and marriages are in direct opposition to what the government are telling you to do. Now, Jason, we need to know about this. I want you to tell us about this kid that we were told across the globe and in America died of the measles, and it turns out that he didn't.
Yeah, this is right, and it's starting to be covered by multiple writers on Substack. And so the first one I got was from John Leake, who works with Peter McCullough, and now Peter Halligan has also shared a similar article. So they are drawing from the same particular interview conducted by Dr. Pierre Corey and Dr. Ben Edwards. And so what they're saying is that at Children's Health Defence, they obtained the records to the medical records of this little girl in Texas who, with measles, who died. After analysing the documents, Pierre Corey has come to the conclusion that the child unequivocally did not die of measles. His expert assessment on the death is that it resulted from a grievous medical error, not purely a breathing condition or viral illness like the media would like us to believe. So in this particular interview, Dr. Corey outlines the facts about the case. He explains how the hospital failed to treat with the proper antibiotics at the proper time and allowed her to die catastrophically in a state of shock. We also hear from Ben Edwards, the doctor who had been treating this family and the other Mennonite families in the area. Dr. Edwards shares how the community has been responding to the outbreak and their perspective on the untimely loss, a tragic mistake. The video also discusses the issue raises azithromycin, but not budesonide, which is a spray, antibiotics for unidentified pneumonia. So what were the risks and the benefits of the MMR injection? And so again, this is a similar thing. So it's the same parallels once again. But what we're seeing now is a case of what is seemingly to be medical malfeasance, almost like an absence of treatment in such a case. And this idea, when you were told maybe 20 years ago, don't overuse antibiotics because if you need them, they mutate, etc. So we then became so it's like the stranger danger thing. We overreacted to it. So now people refuse to take antibiotics. Just we're not going to take them because
they're not good for you.
But at the end of the day, they serve a purpose. They kill bacteria.
It should be a last resort. It should be a last resort because it does destroy a lot of other things as well, and it takes the body a few months to recover. But the thing is, my mum would never let me have antibiotics as a child because she was a microbiologist and she didn't want me to become antibiotic resistant. And then when I was 10 years old, I actually got pleurisy and my lungs filled up with fluid, and that was after I'd had some jabs at school, which was interesting. And one of the jabs was for TB, which is fluid on the lungs. And what did I get? Fluid on the lungs. And she had not allowed me to have antibiotics and overuse them as a child because she knew all about them. And so when I did need it, and they used penicillin, luckily I'm not allergic to it, which is the more natural version, it did help me recover from that illness. So it's difficult, but it just smacks of COVID, doesn't it? Because this small child, may she rest in peace, she didn't die of measles. She died with measles. It's like the people they said died of COVID, but they just died with it, which is, likely the flu. And it's very sad that what we seem to be doing is we seem to be in a world where innocent people and now children are going to have their deaths used as a vehicle to win a political argument, to win the argument that all children should get their MMR. Do we know if this child had the mRNA injections?
The MMR, apparently not from this Mennonite
No,
community.
the mRNA. Did she have a COVID shot?
She certainly wouldn't have had if she came from a Mennonite community.
Right.
But again, you're right. It's to score political points, and clearly what's happened is Trump has put front and centre that he's going to explore the causes of autism that have gone from 1 in 20,000 in 18 years to 1 in 34 or 1 in 36 in such a short period of time. And the excuse is, well, we're just better at working out what autism is, which is an absolute throwaway nonsense line. It's you can't prove that at all, and it's ridiculous that it could be 80-fold or 800-fold difference in that period of time just from testing. So what were you doing before, guys? So was the medical profession asleep at the wheel? Not possible. But it is to gain political advantage when MMR, the vaccine, is in the frame for being the cause. Now that we know that 997 out of 1,000 survive, and that is with current treatments. In this case, this girl should have survived, which would have meant technically 998 out of 1,000, but this is an established statistic. But it is to blur the area again, to cover. And there will be people, once again, that would say that they would prefer a lifetime of autism than being able to be one of the 997 out of 1,000 to survive the measles, for goodness sake. There will always be the contrarians.
Well, there are always people, for whatever reason. It could be the way they were made. It's just a numbers game. Something's going to kill us all. None of us have got a free pass to get off this planet. And unfortunately, some things do kill children, and my God, some infants are born deceased. Something's going to get us all. So you can't possibly live in this bipolar world where when a single person, some 98-year-old great grandfather, dies of what they've described as COVID, DIVOC, that the whole world has to get vaccinated. I mean, this is just absolutely crazy. So the media are also complicit here. And of course, they always were during COVID, because they inflate everything. And they've, again, sold us this story that this child died of measles. So it isn't just political. It's the media. And it's because they're funded by these companies who will benefit from this kind of politicization. And again, it's like the redacted documents. Why isn't this kind of thing, considered to be a crime? You are lying to the public, and these are news organizations that have banners that apparently legitimize them as establishment media, and they are jumping to conclusions. This is the caravan full of explosives to kill Jewish people all over again in Australia that was found out that wasn't the case at all, and it had been there for decades. And we've got to stop. That they tell us that, it's independent media and people on social media that are irresponsible, and we need the e-safety commissioner to push us back in our box. And yet no one ever, no e-safety commissioner, no media watchdog ever censures these people, because when they've made a mistake, as they clearly have, and doctors have proven they have with this child, there's no retraction. There's never a story as big saying, oops, we were wrong, as the initial story saying, oh my God, panic. It's absolutely outrageous.
Exactly right, and that's the point. That will be the great turning point in modern political history, when politicians and governments take responsibility for their bad actions. And whether or not this will actually happen, who knows? But at long last, we stand a small chance. I would argue a big, some will say none, in this term in office of the Trump administration that is going to expose it. They're certainly up against it. The system is working against them. But how long can you live a lie, and how long do you want to live a lie to be able to live on the trajectory? And my argument to all of it is how good is your life at the moment? How good is your life panning out to what you expected? What was your greatest dream and hope? Did you really think that this was all there was, or did you think that there was more? And therefore, the only thing that ever happens is what can be changed in the moment. We can reflect, we can plan as much as we want, but it's got to be carried out in real time. And this is what it is all about. And part of doing what we do and reporting it in real time, and the discussions in real time, is part of that, to permeate through the community and eventually over society as a whole, and affect the change that we all want to see in our lives.
Yeah, well, I'm sick of spending my life auditing the lies of others. Our relationships with our governments now are like a bad and abusive marriage, right? You've got one person in that marriage who, they're lying because their lips are moving. That's literally what we've got with our political representatives right now. And I'm sick of having to spend my time. And, we get up early and we do this show, and I'm sick of having to spend my time auditing the lies of these people. They are treasonous, they are treacherous, they are not representing us. And this is not how we should spend our time. They've ruined so many lives. People are not enjoying themselves anymore. People are having their privacy breached. They're having their health wrecked. They're losing homes, and it's got to stop. What would you like to say before we go, Jason?
Keep your chin up. We are in a positive trajectory now. The JFK files have been released. We are seeing all sorts of fantastic news coming out of the US. The FBI is now in full force, and so affecting great changes coming. I can't wait to see what's happening around the corner. I'm only looking in one direction, and with the federal election coming up here in Australia, I tell you what, there is a whiff of change in the air.
Yeah.
Whether or not that means that we are going to change the status quo or whether it's going to look the same afterwards, I don't think so. I think there's a bit more coming.
Let's get them out. Let's make a plan, Australia, and get them out. They're a bunch of liars, and I'm sick of watching their lying lips move. Thank you for listening to the Daily Australian on Thursday. To myself, Nicola Charles, and my co-host and co-producer, Jason Olborn. We will do this all over again tomorrow, Friday. Yay!